This is a Keller International K2012 Barber chair. It is a very heavy-duty barber chair with a heavy metal frame. It has a extra heavy-duty hydraulic pump mechanism, and you can tell that because the bar is attached at the top, not like an all-purpose chair where the bar is attached at the bottom. Makes for a very thick steel plate and a very heavy-duty base. Makes the chair a very heavy chair. Your pumping mechanism for pumping up is controlled with your foot bail, and when you go all the way down with your foot bail, the chair will recline or will go down to the bottom position. The chair travels about 7 3/4 inches with this pump. And to lock it, you would pull up on the foot bail, and then that would lock it. Unlock it so it'll rotate and spin. It is in that position. Your reclining mechanisms on this chair are on either side, and that's so that if people use it with a sink and they're standing, they're right-handed, they're still standing on the right side to recline, to be able to recline it. Push the foot lever forward, and then the chair will recline. It has a gas shock on it, and that gas shock will help the client come back up. So that's why you have to put pressure on this to recline the chair when there's nobody in it. Because when there's weight in there, it'll go back very easy. And then the gas shock will also take the chair back up by itself and help you lift your client back up. The foot plate typically will always need to be on the floor with the feet on it whenever you're loading or unloading from the chair. So that if you want to stand on the foot plate, you need to basically have it on the floor. All the chairs will work this way. It makes for a safe way of getting in and out of the chair. The headrests on these units are a locking wedge mechanism, so they're infinite, and you can lock it wherever you want. You can pull up on it just by pulling it up, it won't go down. And then when you want it to go down, it basically has a lever in the back with a lock. So it's an infinite lock, positive lock. It's an improvement we made a few years back, and works very well. This is the underside of a K2012 barber chair, typical of most all of our barber chairs. And when you're setting this unit up, you need to set it up properly. You're going to want your client to stand on this footrest when the chair is in a down position. And you're going to need to adjust these feet. They're adjustable. They have a locking nut, which is what happens. The guys don't lock them. They adjust them and they never lock them. And then over time they want to fall off and they lose them. So lock them. Don't lose them. So you're going to want to do is adjust. Typically, you can start by being all the way up on both of these and then lock them. And then when this sits flat on the floor, you need to make sure you have a little bit of a space, like say a 1/2 inch space under here, so that when the chair is in a down position, it'll rotate without these scraping the floor. But then there's also another adjustment that basically will hold your tread plate out a little bit. And that adjustment is this adjustment right here underneath the chair. Is a nut and a bolt, and you screw this out until it holds the chair off the floor a little bit for you, and then that will not allow the calf plate to go down as far. And then that'll hold it up off the floor. You make an adjustment on it, and so it's up off the floor, and then you lock up your nut, otherwise it'll come out of adjustment, and you take a wrench and you lock that up. Typically, nobody ever locks anything, and this is why it always gets loose again and gets out of adjustment. So that way, when your client steps on the foot plate, it's on the floor, and it'll be up enough off the floor to spin. If you want it more, then you need to adjust it out more, or adjust your feet if they're too close to the floor, you can move them up. But this is all part of your reclining mechanisms. When you pull the reclining lever, you're basically pulling on this gas shock, and there's a pin on the end here, and when you pull on it, it's going to expand itself. So you can actually see that this gas shock has gone out. If this pin is held in for any reason, then when your customer's sitting in the chair, it's basically, it's going to drift back by itself, similar to this. You're going to say, well, Jesus always wants to drift back, what can I do about it? And it's a simple adjustment, and underneath the chair, on this particular gas shock, if the pin is being held in all the time, it's always going to recline. On these gas shocks that are underneath the chair right here, you can see that there's this lever, and that's hooked up to the reclining mechanism bar here. On the older, we've upgraded years back from a lighter rod, the guys were bending, to a triple strength rod underneath here, so that there's no way they can bend these. And I'm not too sure how they were bending the old ones, but the first thing you always want to check is make sure that this rod isn't bent on you. Because if this rod is bent, then actually what you've done is you have taken and reduced the distance from the front, from the back here, where this rod is fixed, to the front. And what you now happens is that this pin in here is being held in all the time. And whenever you hold this pin in, at any point, this gas shock is going to move either in or out, because that says release it and let it move. So what happens is these guys bend these rods, it shortens the distance, you're holding a pin in, and the chair is always going to be reclining. So you want to make sure your rod is straight. And I don't know how they bend them all the time, but they won't bend the new ones, because the new one, as you can see, is like 3 times thicker. So you want to make sure everything is bent back into shape, and then you want to check this gap in here. You can do that by laying the chair on its side. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust this gas shock in this housing. First, we're going to make sure everything is straight on all these parts. Underneath, make sure that this L rod is straight. And then we're going to do is what's happened here is we've lost this air gap between this paddle that pushes on the pin on the end of the cylinder and the pin. So you have to have an air space. If you don't, you're going to be holding this pin in, and whenever you hold that pin in, it's going to recline. That pin is the key. You got to have a little air space between this paddle that's going to push on this and this pin. And if this was out of adjustment, if this chair was out of adjustment, we would want a little bit more air space. And it's very simple to do. You don't have to take the gas shock out or anything. You have to loosen the nut, which always has to be tight. And what we're going to do is we're going to screw it all the way up the shaft till we run out of threads. Now, we're going to turn the entire shaft. The gas shock won't move, but we're going to turn the shaft one full turn to unscrew it out of the housing. And when we do that, it's going to create a bigger airspace between the pin and the paddle. Because when the chair was reclining by itself, it wasn't being told to not recline because the pin was being held in. Now when we're done moving the shaft outward, we need to screw this back in and we need to lock it up. Because if you don't, over time, this shaft will screw itself into that housing. If this is loose, every time you use the chair, over a year or two, this thing will be screwing itself into you lose that airspace, which might be your original problem right now, that it got loose somehow. So then you tighten it up, and when you take a reclining lever and you move it, you can actually feel the airspace, and then you can feel the pin. So you feel the gap of the airspace, and then you can feel the pin. And whenever you hold the pin in, it's going to recline. Whenever you don't hold it in, it's going to stop. If you see oil dripping off of your gas shock and it's reclining, then typically your gas shock will need to be replaced. But 95% of the time, it's usually just an adjustment. Very rare do these gas shocks go unless the chair is like 5 or 7 or 8 years old.